The dollar in your savings account today is worth less than the dollar you put in last year. Not because your bank made a mistake, not because of bad luck, because that is how the system was built. And the loss is so slow, so quiet, so invisible, that most people will not realize how much has already gone until the damage is permanent and the window to respond has closed. This is the part that does not get explained clearly enough. When people hear your savings are being destroyed, the instinct is to think of a stock market crash, an account going to zero, a visible, dramatic event. But the kind of destruction that Buffett has spent his entire career warning against is not dramatic. It is structural. It happens in the spaces between your monthly statements. It does not show up as a loss in your account balance. It shows up as a gap between what you earn, what things cost, and what your money is capable of buying over time. Buffett has said that inflation is the investor's biggest enemy. Not recessions, not bear markets, not rising interest rates. Those events are visible and temporary. Inflation is invisible and permanent. Once purchasing power is lost, it does not come back. And the particularly cruel part of how inflation works is that it affects your savings most severely when those savings are sitting still, earning the interest rate your bank offers, while the real cost of living rises at a different rate entirely. Standing still in an inflationary environment is not neutral. It is losing. The dollar has lost approximately 97% of its purchasing power since 1913. That is not a political statement. It is a documented fact from Federal Reserve data on the Consumer Price Index. What cost $1 in 1913 costs approximately $37 today. A full century of savings, left in cash, would have been nearly obliterated, not by a single crisis, but by the compound effect of small annual losses adding up over decades. Buffett understood this by the time he was in his 20s, which is why he never held large amounts of cash as a savings strategy. He converted cash into productive assets as quickly as analysis permitted. The mechanism that is doing this to your savings is not mysterious. Inflation is the rate at which the purchasing power of money declines. When a central bank increases the money supply faster than the underlying economy grows, each existing dollar represents a smaller share of the total economic output. More dollars chasing roughly the same amount of goods and services means each dollar buys a little less. When that process runs at 3 or 4% annually, which has been the real-world inflation rate experienced by most Americans, a savings account earning 0.5% loses roughly 2 to 3% of its real value every single year. Over a decade, that is not rounding error. That is a genuine and significant diminishment of what you actually have. If this kind of financial clarity, the numbers behind what your money is actually doing while you sleep, is something you want more of, subscribe to this channel right now. We are just getting started. Here is the part most people miss entirely. The problem is not just that inflation exists. The problem is the gap between the official inflation number and the inflation you actually experience in your daily spending. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes a consumer price index that measures a basket of goods and services. That basket is constructed with specific methodological choices that critics across the political spectrum have noted tend to produce a lower number than the price increases most households actually experience. Your grocery bill does not know about the CPI methodology. Your rent does not track the official figure. The inflation you live is often materially higher than the inflation you read about. Buffett's approach to this discrepancy has always been to look at actual purchasing power, not the reported number, but the real-world question. What can a dollar buy today versus 5 years ago? He has described his own experience of watching prices change across the businesses Berkshire owns as a more honest inflation measure than any government statistic. When Berkshire's businesses see input costs rising, when suppliers raise prices, When consumers demonstrate willingness to accept higher prices or struggle to, that tells him more than any government index. The official number tells you what they are measuring. The business environment tells you what is actually happening. Write in the comments right now, I choose to see clearly. That is the posture that makes these 7 signs actionable, rather than just alarming. Your savings account is earning approximately 0.4 to 0.5% annually. Prices have risen between 3 and 7%, depending on the category and the year. You are earning 0.5% while spending on a world that costs 4 to 6% more every year. That gap is not small. That is a structural annual loss of 2 to 5% of real value, silently compounding. And most people do not feel it because the account balance goes up, not down. The number is higher next year. You have more dollars. What those dollars buy is the question nobody asks often enough. Run the math on a specific number. $100,000 in a savings account earning 0.5% generates $500 of interest in a year. If your actual cost of living increased by 4% that year, you needed $4,000 more in purchasing power to maintain the same lifestyle. You earned $500. The gap is $3,500. Your account grew by $500. Your real wealth declined by $3,500. You are poorer than you were 12 months ago, and the balance in your account says otherwise. This is sign number 1. And it is operating on every savings account in America simultaneously, every year, invisibly. Buffett's prescription for this is not to stop saving. It is to make sure that the return on your money exceeds the real rate of purchasing power loss, and that the only reliable way to do that over long periods is to own productive assets rather than hold cash. A business that grows its earnings by 8% per year is not just beating your savings account return. It is growing faster than inflation, building real wealth rather than merely maintaining a number on a screen. The savings account maintains the number. The business grows the actual value. The practical starting point is to calculate your own real return. Take what your savings account earned last year, subtract the percentage by which your grocery bill, rent, utilities and transportation costs increased. If the result is negative, and for most Americans it will be, you are not saving. You are losing ground in slow motion. Knowing this does not mean you drain your savings account into riskier assets overnight. It means you approach every dollar with the question Buffett has always asked: is this money working as hard as it needs to be, or is it losing ground while I am not looking? There is one more dimension to sign number 1 that compounds everything above. The interest rate your savings account earns is set by banks based on what they need to attract deposits. When the Federal Reserve sets short-term rates low, banks pay you almost nothing because they do not need to compete for your money. Your savings account rate has nothing to do with what would be fair compensation for the inflation you are experiencing. It reflects the supply and demand for bank deposits. When the banking system is flush with liquidity, you get close to zero. When liquidity tightens, you get a little more, but still below real inflation. The depositor is structurally last in line when interest rates are set. That is not a bug, it is a feature. Sign number 2 arrives at your kitchen table every week, wrapped in a grocery receipt. Your milk costs more, your eggs cost more, your bread, your chicken, your fruit, all of it costs more. Not because farms got less efficient or because there was a single catastrophic supply chain failure, because the cumulative effect of monetary expansion over the past several years has worked its way through the food supply chain and arrived at the shelf. Grocery prices in the United States rose approximately 30% over the 3-year period from 2021 through 2024. 30%. Think about what that means for a family spending $800 a month on groceries. They are now spending over $1,000 for the same cart. $200 per month, $2,400 per year. That is not inflation in the abstract. That is the family budget being restructured by forces most people have no framework to understand. The word inflation makes this feel like an economic concept. The grocery receipt makes it feel like what it is, a reduction in what your dollar can do. Buffett has said that he watches what happens inside Berkshire's consumer businesses as the most reliable inflation gauge available to him. When companies like Dairy Queen or See's Candies can raise their prices and consumers absorb the increase, inflation is real and embedded in the economy. When companies struggle to pass on cost increases because consumers push back or stop buying, it signals that the inflation has hit households hard enough to change behavior. Both of those things are currently happening simultaneously in different parts of the consumer economy. A split-screen picture of an inflation cycle hitting unevenly but broadly. The deeper issue with food inflation specifically is that it hits the households who can least afford it the most severely. Lower-income households spend a higher percentage of their income on food than higher-income households. When food prices rise 30%, a household spending 40% of income on food has lost 12% of their real income before any other costs moved. A higher-income household spending 10% of income on food loses 3%. The same inflation has a profoundly different impact depending on where you sit in the income distribution. This is why Buffett has repeatedly pointed to inflation as a regressive tax. It takes proportionally more from those with less, and does so without any democratic vote. There is a behavioral trap embedded in grocery inflation that Buffett would recognize immediately. When prices rise slowly over several years, consumers adjust their behavior gradually. They shift to cheaper brands, they buy smaller quantities, they skip items that feel discretionary. By the time they have restructured their entire grocery behavior around the new prices, they have forgotten what they used to pay. The reference point moves. The adaptation feels like coping, but what actually happened is that their real standard of living declined, and the adaptation was the acceptance of that decline. The 30% increase did not feel like one dramatic punch. It felt like 30 small adjustments that each seemed manageable. That is precisely how the destruction goes unnoticed until it is already done. Sign number 3 requires a small mental shift. Stop thinking about your salary in dollars for a moment. Think about it in ounces of gold. Gold is not a perfect measure of anything, and Buffett himself does not buy it as an investment. But gold has one property that makes it a useful ruler. Its supply cannot be meaningfully increased by any government or central bank. Unlike dollars, it cannot be printed. So when you price your salary in ounces of gold over time, you get a picture of purchasing power that is cleaner than the CPI. It is immune to the monetary manipulation that affects every dollar-denominated number. In 1971, the average American worker earned approximately $7,000 a year. Gold was approximately $40 per ounce. That annual salary represented roughly 175 ounces of gold. In 2024, the median household income in the United States was approximately $80,000. Gold averaged approximately $2,200 per ounce. That income now represents approximately 36 ounces of gold, from 175 ounces to 36 ounces in 50 years. The dollar number went up dramatically. The gold-denominated reality went down dramatically. What looks like progress in dollar terms looks entirely different when you price it in something that cannot be printed. Buffett uses this kind of analysis as a check on nominal returns. If your investment returned 15% in a year when gold rose 20%, your real wealth declined relative to the hardest available benchmark. Most investors never think this way, which is why they mistake nominal gains for real ones and feel wealthier than they are. The sign here is not just about gold. It is about the habit of checking whether the number going up on your screen represents actual purchasing power growing, or just more of a currency that is buying progressively less. If you are finding real value in what we are building here together, let me know by liking this video right now. That feedback is what keeps this work going. The gold-denominated salary calculation is not meant to make you despair. It is meant to give you an honest reference point. If you know your salary is buying fewer ounces of gold, fewer units of something that holds its value, you have a precise measure of how much the monetary system has taken from your labor over time. That number, honestly assessed, is the starting point for understanding what Buffett means by positioning against inflation. You cannot fix what the monetary system does to paper. You can choose to hold less paper and more of what holds value. Sign number 4 is hiding in plain sight on the same bank statement that shows you earning 0.5% in savings interest. Look at the other side of the statement. The credit card interest rate is 23, 24, 25%. Your bank takes the money you deposit at 0.5%. It lends it to you or to other people at 25 times that rate. The spread between those two numbers is the most vivid illustration of how the banking system is designed and who it is designed to benefit. You provide the capital at 0.5%. The bank prices the risk of lending it at 25%. The difference is the structural transfer that occurs every single day, invisibly, between people who hold savings and institutions that hold pricing power. Run the math on this directly. You have $10,000 in savings, earning 0.5%. After 1 year, you have $10,050. Your neighbor has $5,000 in credit card debt at 24.7%. After 1 year, their balance is $6,235 if they make no payments. Your $10,000 grew by $50. Their $5,000 debt grew by $1,235. The bank made the difference between 0.5% and 24.7% on both of you simultaneously. Two people, both believing they are managing their finances responsibly. One saving, one in debt. The bank capturing a structural spread on both transactions, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Buffett has explained financial systems in these terms many times. He has described the banking system as a machine that is structurally designed to generate returns for capital holders, and that understanding how that machine works, rather than resenting it, is the prerequisite for positioning yourself on the right side of it. The solution is not to avoid banks. It is to minimize the transactions where you are on the wrong side of the spread. Pay off the 25% debt first, then direct capital toward assets that grow faster than the currency depreciates. The bank is not your enemy. Misunderstanding the structure is. One more dimension to this same sign. When the bank lends out your deposits and earns 25%, it is earning that return on money that is effectively yours. You get 0.5%. The bank keeps the rest. The legal structure makes this sound normal. You deposited the money, the bank took on the risk, the bank earned the return. But Buffett would reframe this in the way he reframes every financial relationship. Who actually bears the risk, and who actually earns the return? In a well-functioning deposit relationship, the depositor bears the risk of bank insolvency, earns a below-inflation return, and provides the raw material for the bank's much higher return lending business. Understanding that structure is the prerequisite for choosing a different arrangement. Sign number 5 is the wage gap, the growing distance between what wages increase and what the cost of living actually requires. Since 2000, nominal wages in the United States have risen. But when you strip out inflation, the picture is significantly more complicated. Real wages, wages adjusted for the actual purchasing power of the dollar, have stagnated or declined for the bottom half of the income distribution over significant stretches of the past 25 years. The number on your paycheck went up. What that number can buy did not keep pace. The data on this is specific and significant. According to Economic Policy Institute research from 2000 to 2023, the bottom 20% of wage earners saw their real wages grow by far less than productivity growth over the same period would suggest they should have received. The economy grew, corporate profits grew, stock market wealth grew substantially. Real wages for working-class Americans grew slowly, inconsistently, and in many years not at all after inflation. Buffett has described this divergence as one of the defining economic tensions of his lifetime. A system that produces aggregate wealth while distributing that wealth very unevenly, which eventually creates political and financial instability. What this means practically for you is a test. Take what you earned 5 years ago and what you earn today. Calculate the percentage increase. Then calculate the percentage increase in your housing costs, your food costs, your healthcare costs, your transportation costs over the same period. If your income grew by 12% and your essential costs grew by 20%, you have not gotten ahead. You have been falling behind at 8% per year, compounding, while the headline number on your paycheck suggested otherwise. This is the silent math that defines the financial reality of most American households, a reality that looks stable on the surface and is quietly deteriorating underneath. If you have been trying to build real financial resilience but keep finding that what you earn is not translating into what you keep, check the first pinned comment below this video. It is there for people who are serious about understanding the gap and closing it. Sign number 5. The wage gap also has a psychological layer that makes it particularly hard to see. Your nominal income rising feels like progress. It is wired into how humans evaluate their situation. When you earn more money this year than last year, the brain registers improvement regardless of what that money can actually buy. This is one of the most predictable biases in personal finance psychology. We evaluate our financial well-being based on the nominal numbers in our accounts and on our paychecks, not on the real purchasing power those numbers represent. Buffett accounts for this bias explicitly in how he evaluates Berkshire's performance. He measures the real gain in intrinsic value, not the nominal gain in reported earnings. The habit of looking through the nominal number to the real one is one of the most underrated skills in personal finance. Sign number 6 is the acceleration of the purchasing power gap, the compound effect of small annual losses turning into large structural ones over time. A 2% annual decline in purchasing power over 20 years results in a 33% cumulative loss. 3% over 20 years means 45% gone. 4% over 20 years means more than half your real wealth has evaporated, silently, gradually, with no single event to point to as the cause. This is what Buffett means when he talks about inflation being an investor's biggest enemy. Not because it is dramatic, because it is relentless. Think about what $1,000 in 1990 would need to be today to have the same purchasing power. Using Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI data, that $1,000 from 1990 would need to be approximately $2,200 today just to be worth the same in real terms, not more valuable, just the same. The person who saved $1,000 in 1990 and put it in a savings account earning the average deposit rate would have approximately $2,400 today, barely keeping pace and in some years falling behind. The person who earned a return above inflation compounded that real gain across the same 35 years. The difference between those two outcomes is not a dramatic event. It is 35 years of compounding at 2 or 3 percentage points above zero. The acceleration matters because the conditions that drive purchasing power loss are currently more acute than they have been in 40 years. Monetary expansion, energy price instability, food inflation, and the structural interest rate environment are all simultaneously pressing in the same direction, toward faster loss of purchasing power for dollars held in low-yield instruments. The destruction is not new. The speed is. Sign number 6, the acceleration of purchasing power loss, reveals something about compounding that most people understand in the context of investments, but never apply in reverse to the destruction of savings. When you hear about compound interest building wealth, the principle is that gains earn gains. The same mechanic operates in the opposite direction with inflation. The loss of purchasing power compounds too. If your real purchasing power declines 2% this year, you are starting next year from a lower base. The next 2% loss hits on a smaller number. Not smaller in absolute damage. The real cost of living does not care about your baseline, but your ability to offset that loss is progressively reduced with each compounding cycle. The person who lost 5% of real purchasing power over the last 3 years is less able to rebuild than the person who lost 5% over the last 10. The velocity of loss matters as much as the rate. Sign number 7 is the one that most people find the most uncomfortable, because it reframes what is happening not as a malfunction or a crisis, but as a feature. The system is designed to produce the outcome you are experiencing. The dollar losing purchasing power over time is not an accident of monetary policy or a series of miscalculations. It is the expected and intended output of a system in which governments can expand money supply to fund spending without raising taxes, and in which the cost of that expansion is distributed across all holders of the currency in the form of reduced purchasing power. It is a hidden tax on savings. Buffett has called it exactly that. The mechanism is what economists call the Cantillon effect, named for the 18th century economist who described it. When new money is created and enters the economy, it does not reach all participants simultaneously or equally. The institutions and entities closest to the source of new money, the banks that receive it first, the financial sector that channels it, the asset markets where it is deployed first, experience the new money before prices have adjusted to reflect the increased supply. By the time the new money reaches the worker earning a wage or the saver holding deposits, prices have already risen to reflect the expansion. The saver experiences the inflation without having received any of the early benefit. The financial institution experienced the benefit before the inflation arrived. This is not coincidence. It is the structure of how monetary expansion distributes itself. Buffett has positioned himself on the beneficial side of this structure, not by exploiting it cynically, but by understanding it clearly. He owns businesses. Businesses can raise their prices as costs rise. Businesses that own real assets benefit when those assets inflate in value. A business earning strong returns on equity grows its value in real terms, even as the currency in which it is denominated loses purchasing power. This is why Buffett has been persistent across his career in converting cash into ownership of productive enterprises. Cash loses purchasing power. Businesses built on real competitive advantages do not. The objection that surfaces here is, I cannot do anything about inflation. I cannot change monetary policy. I cannot make my employer pay me more. I cannot control the price of eggs. And you are correct on all of those points. Buffett's observation on this is that the majority of what happens to your financial situation is outside your control, and that the only variables you actually manage are the ones involving how you respond. You cannot stop the system from doing what it does. You can position on the right side of it. The 7 signs are not asking you to fix the system. They are asking you to stop being the victim of a system you now understand. What you can do with these 7 signs is not panic. Panic is a response that looks like action and produces nothing useful. What you can do is restructure the relationship between your money and the forces that are working against it. Every dollar sitting in a savings account earning below the inflation rate is actively losing ground. The question is not whether to have savings. You need liquid reserves. The question is, how much to keep in zero real return form, and what to do with the capital that exceeds your immediate liquidity needs. Buffett's answer, applied across 7 decades, is consistent. Convert it to productive ownership as quickly as careful analysis allows. The practical checklist that Buffett's framework suggests is specific. First, calculate your real return on savings. Subtract the real inflation rate you experience, not the published CPI, from whatever your savings account actually earns. If the number is negative, your savings is a depreciating asset. Second, eliminate all high-interest debt before doing anything else, because paying down 24% interest is a guaranteed 24% return, unmatched by any conventional investment. Third, establish a liquidity buffer, 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash that you do not touch, and then direct capital beyond that buffer toward assets with real inflation protection, equities with pricing power, real assets, businesses you understand. Those are the moves. The order matters. The 7 signs are not a prediction of when something dramatic happens. They are a description of something that is already happening, has been happening for years, and will continue happening unless you restructure your relationship with money at a fundamental level. The savings account is losing, the credit card spread is working against you, the grocery receipt is telling you the truth, the wage gap is compounding, the gold measure is more honest than the dollar measure. The system was built this way, and Buffett has shown across 70 years of documented behavior that understanding it clearly is the prerequisite for positioning yourself to not be destroyed by it. One more thing worth saying before we close. The people who are not currently being destroyed by these 7 signs are not smarter than you. They are not luckier. They understood earlier. They were told by someone somewhere, through a book or a mentor or a channel like this one, that the default behavior in a monetary system is to be the person on the wrong side of every spread, every yield, every debasement cycle. And they made a different choice, not an overnight transformation, a series of small decisions made consistently that over years add up to a financial position that is structurally different from the average. That is available to you, starting with understanding what is actually happening, which is what you just did. Buffett's career demonstrates that understanding the system clearly enough to position on the right side of it is not a privilege of the wealthy. He was not born with financial resources that made this easy. He was born with clarity about how money and value actually work, and he spent his 20s and 30s building both knowledge and capital simultaneously. The knowledge came first. The capital followed. The 7 signs you now understand are the knowledge layer. What you do with that knowledge determines which side of the system you end up on. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I am awake now." There is another video ready for you on screen. The next step in understanding what to actually do about what we uncovered here. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.